So I found myself with a few idle hours the other day, and I looked back on my life, which was a rather depressing experience, and I noticed that my life existed basically of me moving from one bubble to the next. Let me explain what I mean. I grew up in Plymouth, in the southwest of England, which is a beautiful place if you fancy a holiday, but it also is quite cut off from the rest of the country. So it is its own little bubble. It's also not the most ethnically diverse part of the country. I think it's fair to say that ginger hair is the main ethnic minority in Plymouth, and we are a persecuted minority at that. Then I realised that these bubbles I was coming across, when I left Plymouth, they followed me. I moved to Oxford, where I studied, which was fantastic. But Oxford University is its own little bubble. In fact, it's two bubbles. It's a town and a gown. There's this great rivalry between the town and the gown, brilliantly named because the people who are town live in the town, and the people who are called gown also live in the town, but they wear a gown. So there's this division. And I said to a friend, why is there this division? We all need each other. Why is there this division? And my friend said to me, I don't get it either. I mean, without us, the people of the gown, the people of the town would be nothing. And I said, I think your attitude may actually be part of the problem here. And I left Oxford and I moved to Newham in the East End of London. And it's an incredibly ethnically diverse part of the country. And there's four main groups that made up Newham. There's a white working class community that have been there for generations. There's a black Afro-Caribbean community that's been there for 2 or 3 generations. There's a Muslim South Asian community that's been there for about 1 or 2 generations. And there's a yuppie community that I probably was part of that is been there for about half a generation. And my job meant I worked in all these groups. And a friend said to me, it must be brilliant to be living in such a mixed community. And I thought, it is mixed, but no one seems to ever really mix. And I thought, I love all 4 of you guys. You should meet at some point. And I left Newham. And I took a job as a management consultant. I actually clicked on the wrong thing on a website and accidentally applied for a job, but let's not go into that right now. And I found myself as a management consultant. And it was amazing because the firm was full of people from all over the world, different nationalities, different cultures, different ethnicities. And it was wonderful. And we had finally cracked these bubbles until I realized I didn't know anybody who was poor. And in fact, I didn't know anybody who knew anyone who was poor. And in fact, nobody I knew anybody who was poor. And I was in another little bubble again. And I left that job and I went to work in Nairobi in Kenya. And I was in Nairobi when there was an election that went horribly wrong. In a sense, it went brilliantly well in that more than one person won, which is a remarkable result. But unfortunately, neither of them wanted to admit that one of them might have lost. And they told their followers that they had won and the other guys had stolen it, and it led to a lot of violence. And 1,000 people died as a result of that election that went so wrong, and thousands more were made homeless. But the reason it happened was because they were able to tell their tribal followers that the other guys were bad guys. And because they didn't mix enough, they didn't know it wasn't true. And I came back to London and I wanted to do something about it, but I thought maybe it's just me. Maybe I am the person who are bringing these bubbles with me. I'm the cause of this problem. So I started to ask other people about this. And I started to work with young people from very different backgrounds. And I started to ask them, tell me about your lives. And I met Adiba, who was a British Asian girl, aged 16. And I said, what do you want to get out of going on a program with us? And she said, I don't have a white friend. I'd like to meet one. And I met a guy called Dami from South London, black guy, who said to me at the end of a program, he said, do you know what? I'm going to go to uni. And I said, why is that? That's great. Why are you going to go now? He said, I've met someone for the first time, a friend of mine who's going to go. Before that, I'd never met someone as a friend who was planning to go to university. And I met Alice, a white girl from South London. And she said to me, before I came on this program, I met people from all different backgrounds. If I saw a group of black lads, I always crossed the road because I didn't have any black lads who were friends. So I thought they must be in a gang. And I thought, well, okay, well, maybe it's just these people that I've met and maybe it's just me. So I started asking people, when I gave talks, I started asking people questions. So I'm going to ask you some questions. And you've got to make this work, you've got to think of your best friend. Whoever your best friend is, who's the person that you would call in a crisis? The one who actually picks up, that person, okay? Right, you got them? Right, I'm going to ask you a question. If you get the same answer for you and your best friend, you need to put your hand up. Okay, both yeses, put your hand up, both no's, put your hand up. Okay, makes kind of good sense? Good. Okay, here's the first question. Did you go to university or did you go straight to work? If you get the same answer for you and your best friend, put your hand up. Okay, right. Next question, right? Did you grow up in a house or a flat? If you get the same answer, put your hand up. Okay, right. Were your parents both born in this country or a different country? Same answer, put your hand up. Okay, Varies a bit, but a lot of hands are up. And I started to realize that most of the people I meet are putting their hands up a lot. I thought, well, okay, maybe I really am some sort of bad luck charm. And so I started to read. I read some data. I read about other people, some statistics. And I found it's not just me, and it's not just the people I meet. In fact, in America, 75% of white people in America do not have a close friend who's not white. In this country, 90% of non-Muslims do not have a friend who is a Muslim. And it's not just about ethnicity and religion, it's about income. If you're a professional in this country, you are so unlikely to have a friend who's unemployed that it beats any ethnic division I can find anywhere in the Western world. And it starts really young. In this country, in the UK, we put 50% of our poorest kids in 1/5 of the schools. And then we wonder why they don't have the networks to get ahead. But I thought, okay, so I don't like what I'm seeing, but maybe it doesn't really matter. Maybe it's just a bit ugly, but it doesn't really matter. And then the more I read, the more I found my gut was kind of telling me something, and something was wrong. Because actually, it turns out it's bad for our head, it's bad for our heart, and it's bad for our hands. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Well, first of all, it's bad for our head. A lot of people will say about the Prime Minister or the President, whoever they are in charge, they'll say the problem with them is they don't know the price of a pint of milk. They don't know the price of it. It's 40p, how can they not know? I don't really care if they don't know the price of a pint of milk, but I do care if they don't know anybody who needs to obsessively know the price of a pint of milk. And then I began thinking, my mum always used to say to me, if you point the finger at someone, you've got 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. And I began to think, well, hang on, every 4 or 5 years, we are the government. We get to choose. We get to vote, okay? We're in charge. Do I know anyone who obsessively needs to know the price of milk? And actually, I'm voting on, say, benefits or social security. Do I know anyone who really relies on benefits or social security? I'm voting on tax rates for small businesses. Do I know anyone who's really fought to set up a small business? A democracy needs a demos. A demos is a people. A people need to know each other. It's bad for our head. But it's not just bad for our head, it's bad for our heart. When we ran that first ever program with those 3 young people, Dami, Alice, and Adiba, I came home, and it was 2 weeks of living together residentially with 60 young people. I was knackered, exhausted. And I got up and I walked down the street where I live in London, and I felt something I never felt before, apart from exhaustion. I felt more at home than I'd ever felt before in my neighborhood, and I couldn't work out why it was. And then I realized that everybody I was walking past reminded me of somebody I'd spent the last 2 weeks of my life with. And that feeling of feeling at home, doctors have looked into this. It's a lack of anxiety. It's a sense of belonging. And actually, it's very real. If you live in a diverse neighborhood, ethnically diverse, income diverse, age diverse, and you meet with those people, you get to know those people, you feel less anxious. Your well-being is better. Your cortisol levels fall. You feel less stressed. Your health is better. It's good for your heart. So these bubbles are bad for our head, they're bad for our heart, they're also bad for our hands. The hands are things you work with, whether you're typing, whether you're meeting people, whether you're lifting things. Your hands are things you do to get jobs. In this country, 4 out of 10 jobs come from people you know. They come from word of mouth. Because it's not just what you know, it's who you know. And yet we're putting half of the poorest young kids in 1/5 of the schools. If you're unemployed, the majority of people unemployed in this country have mostly unemployed friends. A study done in Western Europe showed if they make one friend who's one close friend in work, they become 13% more likely to get a job in the next 12 months, one friend. So I'm now thinking, we've got to do something about this. But I'm also thinking, why the heck is this happening? What's going on? It's like a murder mystery to me. Right? Who are the culprits behind it? Now, the best murder mysteries, right, have more than one culprit. You know, there's a spin at the end and 2 people are involved, okay? Well, this is one of those, I'm afraid, people. And the bad news is, so it's good for you, bad for your hands. Remember that? Hand, heart, heads. Okay, the bad news is, the first culprit is us. It's us. It's actually us, right? And the trouble is, the thing about us is we quite fancy people like us. We have this little bias. It's quite a small bias, but we have this little bias towards people who remind us in some way of ourselves. There's even a word for it. It's called homophily. A slight preference towards people like you. Don't believe me? Let me tell you 3 ways it works. It affects what you buy, it affects who you date, it affects who your friends are. It affects what you buy. A study done in America looked at people buying life insurance. And they tried to work out who buys the most life insurance, who do you sell life insurance to? And they found this: you will buy more life insurance if you are sold it by someone who has got the same political persuasion as you, the same education as you, the same income level as you, and the same height as you. It affects what you buy, okay? It also affects who you date. They did a study where they took 30 men, split them into 2 groups, and they gave them 30 photos each. Identical photos apart from the last photo. And they asked them to rate them on how attractive they were. Last photo was different. 15 men got just a random stranger. 15 men got half a stranger's face merged with their own face. Which did the men prefer? They preferred the amalgam Mongol face, which was half themselves. We fancy ourselves, right? It also affects who you're friends with. There's an amazing school in the north of England where they took a school that's predominantly British Asian and a school that's predominantly white British, and they merged the schools together to try and make some friendships happen. And they tracked who was friends with who, and they did it by watching who sat next to who in the dinner table. And they found this. Well, for a start, the British Asian kids and the British white kids didn't mix that much. But that's not that surprising to begin with. They were at different schools. So I like the bit they found next. Kids with glasses, more likely to sit next to kids with glasses. Kids with ginger hair, you bet it, more likely to sit next to kids with ginger hair. Homophily. We have this slight bias to people who, for some reason, remind us of ourselves. But look, 2 culprits, I said. So it's not just us, it's also everyone else, right? This doesn't work if it's just one person. It's all of us interplaying with each one of us. Right? I want to show you what I mean by that. And so what we've got here is a little village of people. So I've got it laid out here, and they're all together. So there's about 15 people, 16 people all living together. And I'm taking away a lot to create some more space. So the little village is becoming a city. Suddenly people can move if they want to, okay? There's space to move into. And I'm just adding a few extra people, a few people you could potentially move closer to or visit. Now here's the only rule. As long as you've got more people of your colour with you, you won't move. As long as you've got more people of your colour, you won't move. First, not many people move. But as some people move, more and more people find they've not got many people like them around. And so more and more people want to move. Simple rule. That's the only rule I applied. How many moves does it actually take before we've just got one to move and the board's completely divided? Now the question is, it doesn't happen this quickly in real life, right? But all I've applied is a slight bias there and a bit of space, and everything's moved. Now the question is this what's actually happening in real life? Well, let me suggest, what might we see if it were the case? I think we'd see our heads, a problem with our heads. What would we see? I think we'd see people voting increasingly on the basis of ethnic lines. I think we'd see elections or referendums happening and people going, how did that happen? I don't know anybody who voted like that. I think we'd see politicians coming along who appeal to our basest instincts, and a lot of people voted for them because they felt like they were like them. I think we'd see the rise of identity politics. I think we'd see the rise of populism. We'd see a problem with our hearts as well. What would we see? We'd see a rise of anxiety. We'd see more people taking medication to help with that. We'd see more loneliness. People talking about being lonely. We'd see a problem with our hands. We'd see certain people who are really well networked doing really well out of the economy, and certain people who lacked those networks feeling very cut off and left behind. Now that is the world I am seeing around me now, and it worries me. And the question is, what do we do about it? And I think this is your choice, because we've got a lot of directions we could go. And I think there's 3 options for you today. One is you can say, this is kind of interesting, I'm going to look into this a bit, and then not really look into it, right? Option 1. Option 2, you could take solace from the fact that the second culprit is everyone else. So it's okay, guys, as long as everyone else does something, we'll be fine. And the third option is you can say, actually, it's about me, and it's about the bubble I'm in, and maybe I need to do something about it. Final story I'm going to leave you with. I met a guy in Newham who was called Billy, who'd lived there all his life, and I went to a park one weekend, about a mile or 2 away from where Billy and I lived, and I told him about it. And I said, have you ever been there, Billy? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because it's not for the likes of me. And we're talking about a park. We're not talking about a management consultancy job. We're not talking about Nairobi. We're not talking about Oxford University. We're talking about a park. And I don't want to live in a country where Billy's bubble doesn't include a park, where Adiba's bubble doesn't include someone who's white, where Dami's bubble doesn't include university. And that's why I want us to pop our bubbles. Thank you very much.